It was the summer of 2008. I was 18. My family had a cabin up in northern Michigan on a small, quiet lake. It wasn't fancy. Just a simple A-frame surrounded by woods. No internet. Spotty cell service. Just us. And the lake. My parents usually went up for a few weeks in July. That year, I decided to stay for the whole month of August by myself. Before college started. A last bit of freedom. They were hesitant. But I was old enough. I promised to check in every day. The first week was perfect. Hot days. Cool nights. I spent my time swimming. Reading. Taking the old rowboat out. The lake was clear. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. The nights were dark. So dark you could see every star. The only sounds were crickets. Frogs. The distant hoot of an owl. I usually left the screen door open at night. To let the breeze in. The cabin had no air conditioning. The summer nights could get humid. I'd fall asleep to the sounds of the woods. And the gentle lapping of water against the shore. It started subtly. A few nights in. I'd wake up. Not suddenly. Just awake. And the sounds would be gone. No crickets. No frogs. Just absolute silence. A heavy, unnatural silence that pressed in on you. I'd lie there. Listening. Waiting for the sounds to return. They always did. After a few minutes, the crickets would start up again. Then the frogs. I'd tell myself it was just a natural lull. The animals pausing. Then things started to move. Small things. My book. Left on the bedside table. I'd find it on the floor in the morning. Or my sunglasses. On the kitchen counter. I'd find them on the porch. I was alone in the cabin. I knew I wasn't doing it. I was careful. Organized. I told myself it was the wind. Or I was just forgetful. The isolation was getting to me. One night, I woke up again to the silence. No crickets. No frogs. Just that profound stillness. I lay there. Staring at the ceiling. The moon cast long shadows through the screen door. I could see the outline of the trees outside. Still. Motionless. Then I heard it. A soft splash. From the lake. Not a fish jumping. Something heavier. Something deliberate. I sat up. Looked out the screen door. The lake was dark. A smooth, inky blackness. The moon reflected on its surface. I saw nothing. But I heard it again. Another splash. Closer this time. And then. A faint ripple on the surface of the water. Moving towards the shore. Towards the cabin. I held my breath. My heart pounded. I tried to rationalize it. A beaver. A muskrat. But the splashes were too heavy. Too rhythmic. The ripple reached the shore. It disappeared into the darkness beneath the trees. I strained my eyes. Saw nothing. The silence was absolute. I lay back down. Pulled the blanket up to my chin. My skin felt cold. Despite the humid air. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning I went down to the lake. The water was calm. Clear. The sun was bright. The air smelled fresh. I looked for tracks. In the damp earth near the shore. Nothing. The ground was undisturbed. I tried to forget it. But the image of that ripple, moving towards me in the dark, it stayed with me. The following night it was worse. I woke up to the silence again. But this time, it was accompanied by a feeling. A palpable sense of presence. Like someone was standing over me, watching me. I kept my eyes closed. Pretended to be asleep. My body was rigid. My breath shallow. I felt a cold breath on my face. Not a breeze. Something localized. Something icy. And then, a faint whisper. Directly in my ear. Indistinct. Like someone speaking through water. I couldn't make out the words. But the tone. It was mournful. Desperate. I lay there. Frozen. The whisper continued. A low guttural sound. Then it stopped. I waited. For what felt like an eternity. I heard nothing. The silence was absolute. Slowly. Cautiously. I opened my eyes. The room was dark. The moon cast shadows. I saw nothing. I was alone. I sat up. My body trembling. I turned on my bedside lamp. The sudden light made me flinch. I looked around the room. Everything was normal. My book. My glasses. My clothes. All in place. I got out of bed. Walked to the screen door. Looked out at the lake. It was dark. Still. The moon reflected on its surface. I saw nothing. I heard nothing. But the feeling of presence. It lingered. I didn't sleep again that night. I sat in the living room. With all the lights on. Reading. Waiting for the sun to rise. The next day I called my parents. I told them I wasn't feeling well. That I wanted to come home early. They were concerned. but they agreed. My dad drove up that afternoon. I packed my bags quickly. I didn't tell him what had happened. He wouldn't have believed me. He would have said I was imagining things, that the isolation was getting to me. As we were leaving, my dad went to lock the front door. I was already in the car. I looked back at the cabin, the old A-frame, standing silently in the woods. The screen door was still open, just a crack. I saw it then, a faint shimmer, in the darkness of the cabin, just inside the screen door. A translucent figure, tall, thin, stood there, motionless, staring out at the lake. His back to me. I gasped. My dad looked at me. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," I said quickly. "Just forgot something." He shrugged, finished locking the door, got in the car. We drove away. I kept looking in the rearview mirror. The figure was still there, standing in the darkness of the cabin, watching the lake. I never went back to that cabin. My parents sold it a few years later. They said it was getting too old, too much work. I still think about it, sometimes, on a quiet summer night, when the air is still, and the crickets are silent. I remember that profound stillness, that cold breath, that mournful whisper. I did some research years later, on the history of the lake. Before the cabin was built, there was a small settlement there, a few families, a logging camp, and a tragedy. A young woman. Her name was Mary. She drowned in the lake. One summer night. Her body was never found. They said she just vanished. I think about Mary, and the silence, and the figure, standing in the darkness of the cabin, watching the lake, waiting. I think about what she whispered. That night, I couldn't understand the words, but I understood the feeling, the despair, the endless waiting, the lake house silence. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the presence of something else, something that lingered, something that watched, something that waited for company. And I knew I had been lucky to leave. Not everyone did. It was the summer after high school graduation. 4 of us, me, Alex, Chloe, and Ben. We had planned this camping trip for months, deep in the Allegheny National Forest, a place known for its quiet, its remoteness, no cell service, no distractions, just us and the woods. We drove up in Alex's old pickup truck, loaded with tents, sleeping bags, coolers full of food. The sun was setting as we pulled off the main road, onto a gravel path, then a dirt track. It got darker fast. The trees closed in. The air grew cooler, smelled of damp earth and pine needles. We found a clearing we liked, near a small stream. It was perfect. We set up our tents, built a fire pit. The crackle of the campfire was comforting. The flames danced, casting long, shifting shadows into the surrounding woods. We told stories, laughed, ate hot dogs and marshmallows. The stars were incredible out there, so many of them, like spilled diamonds on black velvet. It was late, past midnight, the kind of night you remember forever, or try to forget. That's when it started. The sounds, not the usual sounds of the forest, not crickets, not owls, something else. A faint rustling, from deeper in the trees, too rhythmic to be an animal, too soft to be the wind. "You guys hear that?" Ben asked. He was usually the fearless one, always joking, but his voice was low. We all listened. The rustling came again, a soft, dry whisper, like leaves being dragged across the ground. But there was no breeze. The air was still. "Just an animal probably," Alex said. He tried to sound confident, but his eyes were darting into the darkness beyond the firelight. We tried to ignore it, went back to our stories, but the rustling continued, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away, always just at the edge of hearing, always just beyond the reach of our flashlights. Then the shadows started to play tricks. Or maybe they weren't tricks. I kept seeing movement, in my peripheral vision, a tall, thin shape, darting between trees. Gone the moment I looked directly. I'd rub my eyes, tell myself it was the firelight, the smoke, my imagination. Chloe, who was usually very calm, pulled her blanket tighter. "I feel like we're being watched," she whispered. Her voice was barely audible. We all felt it. That prickling sensation on the back of your neck. That undeniable feeling of unseen eyes. It was unsettling. The laughter died down. The conversation became sparse. We huddled closer to the fire, as if its warmth could ward off the cold dread that was settling over us. The fire itself started to act strange. The flames would dim. For no reason. The wood wasn't wet. There was no wind. Then the embers would glow brighter. Almost pulsing. Like a heartbeat. Alex tried to poke it. To make it burn stronger. But it seemed to have a mind of its own. Later I went to get something from my tent. It was only a few feet from the campfire. But stepping away from the light felt like stepping into a different world. The darkness was absolute. Oppressive. The air was colder here. And that smell. That faint, metallic tang. Like old blood. Or rust. It was stronger now. As I reached my tent, I heard it. A whisper. Directly in my ear. So close I felt breath on my cheek. It was a child's voice. Mournful. Desperate. Indistinct words. But the tone. It was pure agony. I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs. I spun around. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness. Nothing. Just the trees. The shadows. I was alone. But the whisper. It was too clear. Too real. I scrambled back to the campfire. My legs felt like jelly. I heard something, I whispered. My voice was trembling. Alex and Ben looked at me. Their faces grim. What? Alex asked. A whisper. A child's voice. Right next to me, I said. Chloe gasped. Her eyes wide. I heard it too. Earlier. From the stream. Ben shook his head. No. No way. It's just the woods. The wind. But his voice lacked conviction. He kept glancing into the darkness. We tried to convince ourselves. It was exhaustion. The isolation. The power of suggestion. But the feeling of being watched intensified. The rustling grew louder. More insistent. Now it sounded like footsteps. Shuffling through the leaves. Around our camp. We heard a new sound. A low, guttural growl. From deeper in the woods. It wasn't an animal. It was too deep. Too unnatural. It seemed to vibrate through the ground. Through our very bones. The campfire suddenly dimmed again. Almost went out. The shadows stretched. Twisted. Seemed to writhe. We huddled together. Our flashlights pointed frantically into the darkness. Their beams weak against the encroaching blackness. We saw them then. Not clearly. Just glimpses. Fleeting movements. In the shadows beyond the firelight. Tall, thin figures. Translucent. Shimmering. Like heat haze. They moved silently. Between the trees. Their forms indistinct. But their presence was undeniable. They were surrounding us. Slowly. Patiently. We need to go, Chloe whispered. Her voice was a choked sob. No one argued. The fear was palpable. Overwhelming. We scrambled to pack our tents. Our gear. Our hands fumbled. Our movements clumsy with terror. The rustling grew louder. Closer. The growling intensified. It sounded like it was right behind us. We threw everything into the back of Alex's truck. Jumped in. Alex fumbled with the keys. His hands shaking. The engine roared to life. A welcome sound. A sign of escape. As we pulled away, the headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the woods. I looked back and saw them. Standing at the edge of our clearing. A multitude of figures. Tall. Thin. Their forms shimmering. Their empty eyes fixed on us. Watching us leave. Their silence more terrifying than any scream. We drove fast. Bouncing over the dirt track. The gravel road. The paved road. We didn't stop. Not until we reached the highway. The lights of passing cars. The distant hum of civilization. It felt like a different world. We never spoke about it directly. Not to our parents. Not to anyone else. What could we say? That we had been surrounded by unseen things in the woods? That they had whispered to us? That they had watched us? They wouldn't have believed us. They would have said we were crazy. But the memories clung to us. Like a cold, unseen presence. Alex stopped going camping. Chloe had nightmares for months. Ben became quieter. More withdrawn. I still think about it. Sometimes. On a quiet summer night. When the air is still. And the crickets are silent. I remember that profound stillness. That cold breath. That mournful whisper. That guttural growl. And the shimmering figures. Standing in the darkness of the woods. Watching. Waiting. I did some research years later. On the history of the Allegheny National Forest. Before it was a national forest. There were old logging camps. Small settlements. And stories. Of things in the woods. Things that took people. Things that never left. Things that haunted the land. I think about those things. And the silence. And the figures. Standing in the darkness of the woods. Waiting. I think about what they whispered. That night. I couldn't understand the words. But I understood the feeling. The hunger. The ancient, endless hunger. The whispering woods. They weren't just trees. They were a living entity, filled with the echoes of forgotten lives, and the presence of something else. Something that lingered. Something that watched. Something that waited. For company. And I knew. We had been lucky to leave. Not everyone did. It was the end of July. The kind of summer night where the air was thick and heavy. Humid. No breeze. Just the distant hum of cicadas. Me and my two friends Mark and Sarah were bored. We were 17. Living in a small town where nothing ever happened. Mark suggested it. Let's go drive the Old Mill Road. We all knew about the Old Mill Road. Local legend. Said to be haunted. An old logging trail. Barely paved. Deep in the woods. People told stories about strange lights. Whispers. Things following your car. We usually laughed about it. But tonight, we were bored enough to consider it. We piled into Mark's old sedan. The windows were down. The warm, damp air filled the car. The radio played some pop song. We drove out of town. Past the last streetlights. The road turned to gravel. Then just dirt. The trees closed in. The darkness was absolute. The headlights cut through it, illuminating only a small tunnel ahead. The air got colder out there. Unexpectedly. Even with the windows down. It smelled different too. Not pine. Something damp. Like wet earth. And something metallic. Like old iron. Creepy already, Sarah muttered from the back seat. Her voice was low. We laughed. Nervous laughter. Mark gripped the steering wheel tighter. The car bounced over potholes. The engine hummed. The only sound for a while. Then the radio started to act strange. The music faded. Replaced by static. A low, persistent hiss. Mark tried to change the station. Nothing. Just static. Great. No signal out here, he grumbled. But it wasn't just static. Beneath the hiss, I heard it. A faint whisper. Indistinct. Like someone speaking through a very old, broken speaker. I strained to hear. It was gone. Just static again. Did you guys hear that? I asked. Mark and Sarah shook their heads. Hear what? Just static. I told myself it was my imagination. The isolation. The darkness. The stories. It was getting to me. We drove deeper. The trees were dense. Almost touching overhead. Creating a tunnel of blackness. The cold intensified. It was now a distinct chill. Not a draft. It felt localized. Like a pocket of frigid air the car was driving through. Then the headlights flickered. Briefly. Just a split second. Then back to full power. Mark cursed. Damn old car. But it happened again. And again. A rhythmic flicker. Like someone was turning them on and off. From outside the car. That's not the car, Mark, Sarah whispered. Her voice was tight. We all felt it now. That prickling sensation on the back of our necks. The undeniable feeling of being watched. The silence in the car was heavy. No one spoke. Just the hum of the engine. The static on the radio. And the rhythmic flicker of the headlights. I started seeing things. In my peripheral vision. In the darkness just beyond the headlight beams. Tall, thin shapes. Darting between trees. Too fast to be real. Too distinct to be dismissed. I'd snap my head around. Nothing. Just the dark woods. Then the car started to pull to the right. Slightly. Mark fought the wheel. What the hell? It's like something's pulling us, Sarah said. Her voice was a choked whisper. The car continued to drift. Slowly. Towards the ditch. Mark wrestled the wheel. His knuckles white. He managed to correct it. We swerved back to the center of the road. We heard it then. A faint scratching. From the roof of the car. Like fingernails on metal. Rhythmic. Persistent. We all looked up. Our eyes wide. The sound was clear. Undeniable. Get us out of here, Mark. I yelled. My voice was shaking. Mark floored it. The old sedan lurched forward. Bouncing violently over the ruts in the dirt road. The scratching intensified. It sounded like something was trying to claw its way in. The whispering returned on the radio. Louder now. Clear. A cacophony of overlapping voices. Agony. Despair. And one voice. Distinct. A child's voice. Crying. The air in the car grew intensely cold. Our breath misted. The smell of rotten meat filled the car. Overpowering the damp earth and iron. It was sickening. We saw them then. In the rearview mirror. In the darkness behind us. Flickering lights. Not headlights. Small. Numerous. Moving. Following us. Like eyes. Hundreds of them. Glowing in the blackness. There behind us. Sarah screamed. Her voice was raw with terror. Mark drove faster. The car fishtailing. Skidding. The scratching on the roof was frantic. The whispering from the radio was a chorus of agony. The child's crying was deafening. Suddenly, the car hit something. Not a bump. A solid impact. The whole car shuddered. Violently. We were thrown forward. Then back. The engine sputtered. Died. The headlights went out, plunging us into absolute darkness. The silence that followed was profound. Terrifying. No crickets. No frogs. No wind. Just the heavy, oppressive stillness. And the smell. That putrid, metallic smell. We sat there. Frozen. In the dark. No one spoke. No one moved. Our hearts pounded. Then we heard it. From outside the car. A soft thump. Like something heavy landing on the hood. And then, a dragging sound. Slowly. Deliberately. Moving across the windshield. I heard a faint whisper. Directly outside my window. So close I felt breath on the glass. A child's voice. Mournful. Desperate. You stopped. I closed my eyes. I saw faces. Distorted. Gaunt. Their eyes empty. Their mouths open in silent screams. They were everywhere. In the darkness outside. Surrounding the car. I opened my eyes. The car was still. Silent. The darkness was absolute. I heard the dragging sound again. From the hood. Then it stopped. A faint light appeared. Just outside my window. A small, flickering light. It was an eye. A glowing, empty eye. Staring directly at me. It was surrounded by darkness. But the light was undeniable. I gasped. My breath hitched. I could feel its presence. Cold. Ancient. Hungry. Then it was gone. The darkness returned. Absolute. We sat there for what felt like hours. Until the first hint of dawn. A faint gray light in the sky. The smell of rotten meat lingered. The cold was still there. Mark tried the ignition. The engine sputtered. Then roared to life. The headlights flickered on. Illuminating the dirt road ahead. Nothing. No figures. No eyes. Just the woods. We drove out. Slowly. Silently. We didn't look back. We didn't talk. Not until we reached the paved road. The first signs of civilization. We never went back to the old mill road. We never spoke about it directly. Not to our parents. Not to anyone else. What could we say? That we had been surrounded by unseen things in the woods? That they had touched our car? That they had whispered to us? They wouldn't have believed us. They would have said we were crazy. But the memories clung to us. Like a cold, unseen presence. Mark sold his car a month later. Sarah refused to drive at night. I still have nightmares. Of flickering lights. Of empty eyes. Of a child's mournful whisper. I did some research years later. On the history of the old mill road. Before it was a road. It was a burial ground. For a small, forgotten settlement. Wiped out by disease. Long ago. Their graves disturbed when the road was built. I think about them. The forgotten. And the silence. And the figures. Standing in the darkness of the woods. Waiting. I think about what they whispered. That night. I couldn't understand the words. But I understood the feeling. The hunger. The ancient, endless hunger. The old mill road. It wasn't just a road. It was a path. To something else. Something that lingered. Something that watched. Something that waited. For company. And I knew. We had been lucky to leave. Not everyone did.